necessarily a one-to-many discussion. I'd like it to be an opportunity for a many-to-many discussion. So feel free to, as Corrado says, if you have a question, then just alert Corrado on the chat, and we'll be able to unmute you, and feel free to say your piece. It could be an observation, it could be an insight, it could be a challenge, it could be something you want to contribute to build on what I'm saying, or it could just be simply a question. I will be pausing for questions throughout, so see that as an opportunity to chime in if you want to. On the clock, we have 2 hours, starting at 6:30. I should imagine it's going to take about 1.5 hours, so perhaps less than the 2 hours that we have available. But let's see how things emerge. So I'm going to share my screen now. In fact, I should be Corrado. Can you just confirm that you can see the open slide of my deck, or should I share my screen? You're muted at the moment. I think I need. Not now. Okay, let me share my screen. Just bear with me.
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. Okay. So we're here today for me to share some thinking and some of my experiences on organisational resilience, creating opportunities through crisis and change. And crisis and change is very much prevalent today in terms of language and reality that all of us are facing. We are going through seismic change, unprecedented change. COVID-19 has created many challenges, and quite personal challenges for many of us. So I just want to, first of all, recognise that although I may be talking from a business point of view, resilience is also something that we can consider for ourselves and our families as well. And we need to show compassion and understanding and patience with these aspects as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And predominantly, we're going to be talking about business or organisational resilience. As Corrado says, these slides are available. If you can see my mouse, I'm just showing you the URL to those. Those go to my website. In fact, that's the web page which has a summary, and then in there an embedded presentation, which you feel free to go through those slides there at your leisure, or download it. I'm a business agility coach. I've spent many years in the agile space, over 10 years. I've developed an understanding and practitionership in many different organisations, the BBC, MTV, Nike, more recently some of the big four supermarket retailers, one of the big four consultancies, and I guess a midpoint through my over 10 years of agility experience, worked for a number of broadsheet newspapers as well. So I think I have some stories to share, so some battle scars to regale, and hopefully this will stimulate conversation as well as add colour to the slides that I'm going to be going through. First of all, I'd like to quote Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, and he said this in 1982. But I think, for me at least, this really resonates and to the times that we're living in now. Only a crisis produces real change, he says. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. So quite often we don't see crisis or seismic change as advantageous, but there are some advantages in a crisis, and some leaders are quite clever to work with their colleagues, organisations and customers to capitalise on this opportunity for change. This bit around where Milton Friedman talks about actions are taken depending on the ideas which are lying around. Quite often we cannot start from scratch when we're innovating, we're finding new opportunities. We need to capitalize on existing ideas or concepts. And if you guys are familiar with the work of Dave Snowden and the made famous by his Cynefin framework, he quite often says that exaptation is an opportunity where we can repurpose products or services, operations to be able to navigate and pivot really quickly to be able to deal with threat, but also to take opportunities. So this slide here is some of the organisations I work for. I'm going to be drawing stories from some of these organisations and other organisations that I've spent time with. This slide is an agenda for what we're going to be going through this evening. First of all, a lot of us are agilists. We work in the Lean Agile space. And I'd like to start the talk by just having an awareness of where we are in terms of the maturity of Lean Agile adoption and for many of the organisations I work for, and where we may be able to continue that journey for many organisations, but also add additional value. And I believe an understanding of organisational resilience is an extension or some which we can build upon that Lean Agile platform that we all have experience of. I'd like to share some thinking about some of the unknown problems that many organisations face. Then introduce the concept of resilience. What does that mean? Going to be bringing in some thinking from the likes of Nassim Taleb, who you guys may know of, who wrote things like Anti-Fragile and introduced or made popular concepts such as black swan events. Then we're going to go into how can organisations deal with shock events, and then how bring that back to Lean Agile. How does that relate to Lean Agile? So that's an agenda. So first of all, we're going to talk about the maturity or the current position of Lean Agile. I won't spend too much time on this because this is a talk around resilience and resilient organisations. So, as we know, this should be fairly familiar to many of us on this call here. There tends to be three different methods or approaches for helping to deal with opportunities or problems. Scrum, Lean Startup. Lean Startup there's an overlap in all these three areas. They're not mutually exclusive, but Lean Startup tends to focus on learning and experimenting, bringing something to market very rapidly, notions such as the minimum viable product. So what is the minimum that we can do to maximize learning and drive some kind of value? It could be revenue or customer satisfaction, but being able to close down those learning loops as much as possible. Lean tends to look at flows of value, customer demand. There's a need, we need to serve that need, customer requirements or stakeholder requirements as fast as possible. Tends to focus on flow and balance. And then Scrum, again, that we know that's a fantastic method which can help support the agile mindset and the agile approach, focuses on people and interactions. So all three elements can interplay and help organizations deliver customer value at the right pace. So thinking about the adoption curve of Lean Agile, I believe there's a lot to say that our expertise has allowed Lean Agile to cross the chasm, move from the innovators, early adopters, crossing that chasm into early majority. And it's become established. It's trending. It's and indications of that is the increasing amount of certification, the saturation of the market, the last two or 3 years, or small number of years, the emergence of big four consultancies moving into the Lean Agile space. This image here is actually taken from a supplement from less than 6 months ago. This is actually a supplement which was included in the Times newspaper. So the fact that the Times newspaper have supported organisations to put something together called Enterprise Agility just shows how mature and mainstream Agile has become. So I think we've done a good job, but I think there's an opportunity to see what else we can do to support organisations. And I think one element or one arm of that is to consider how we can support organisations deal with shock events. How can we allow them to increase organisational resilience? So that's what I want to talk about. What's next for us? One possibility. So I just want to pause there. If there's any questions, Corrado, if there's any questions that people have posed, feel free to unmute that person. I'm just going to pause there for 10 seconds.
Actually, Dean, I have a question. There are no other questions, but I have a question. In the cross the chasm curve, in your opinion, the enterprise agility, that is the mention that you take from the newspaper, where we are in this curve, in your opinion, given your experience?
I would say that we have crossed the chasm. We're somewhere around early majority. It's very hard to say because there's so many different factors and variables and way of measuring it, but for many this is common currency. I don't think true enterprise or business agility exists for many organizations, because my understanding of business agility, or the one which I advocate, is one where leadership, the fundamental structures of the organizations are realigned to be able to rapidly innovate, and I'm going to be speaking about this, rapidly innovate to be able to reshape organizations to be able to deal with the emerging needs of customers and stakeholders and the emerging needs of the organizations themselves. And this is quite a profound change that many organizations, some are choosing to embark upon, but others aren't, because many organizations, particularly the incumbent ones that have been around for many decades, have become pattern trained or very calcified around existing products and services and operations. They found it very, very difficult to be able to unlearn, to use one of Barry O'Reilly's words, to unlearn some of the things that they've become accustomed to. And there's some deep introspection which needs to happen with these organizations. And that deep introspection, in fact, can occur during a crisis. I'll be touching upon this throughout the presentation. So Corrado, those are a few kind of words that I'm improvising there. Does that resonate with you?
No, I'm fine. Thank
you.
I like the idea that the maturity of an enterprise in terms of agility can be measured with the capacity to reorganize itself for facing new events. And I will have another question related to this capability in this situation of the COVID-19, but I will tell you later.
Fantastic.
Please.
Okay, so thank you. So if there's another questions, I'm going to go ahead. So what's next? We understand the state of Lean Agile, and in many ways has crossed the chasm into early majority. And I think I would describe myself as a change agent. I would describe myself as someone who enjoys working on the edges of emergence. And I should imagine many people on the call on this meetup also like to be on the edge of change. And so if things are becoming established, where next can we look? And I think business agility is one strong candidate for us to move towards. So let's tell a couple of stories to build the foundation of why organizational resilience is really important. So what problems profoundly affect organizations? And the first story I want to tell is one of Nokia. And this is a story of 20 years ago. But I'd like to go back deeper into Nokia's history. And what we have here is a collection of images which tells a story of a wide portfolio of interests and a deep history that Nokia has. So not many know that Nokia was started in the Victorian age in 1865, where they had a paper mill operation, and they were working in forestry, and they were producing paper products. And you can see here, this is some toilet roll. So you could actually branded Nokia toilet roll. And then throughout the decades, as the decades rolled on, they moved into different areas. They were really diversified. They moved into consumer products made out of rubber material. So here you can see some Nokia Wellington boots. They moved into industrial cabling. They moved into creating tyres. You can see here a Nokia tyre. And then towards the latter part of the 20th century, they moved into telecommunication. So what we have here is the widespread of options. And some of these options become more and more viable. So in the early 80s, they responded to a new opportunity with a developing competency in telecommunications. In Europe, there's a deregulation in the telecommunication market, which allowed more companies to move into an open market as a consequence of the telecommunication deregulation. And so it wasn't the big national telephone incumbents such as British Telecom of the day in the UK, which has dominated the market. The market was opened up, and Nokia was the first European telecommunication company to create the car phone. And they capitalized on this opportunity, and they became a dominant player in the telecommunication market. And as we know, those who are old enough to know, maybe I need to update some of my references here, because there may be some younger people in the audience who are not that familiar with Nokia. But throughout the early years of this century, they began to really dominate the market. And you may recall there are two players who dominated the emerging mobile handset market. There's Nokia and Ericsson. And what's interesting, Nokia and Ericsson shared many suppliers in their upstream supply chain. One such supplier was Philips, and Philips produced a lot of their chips to solder onto their chipset to run their mobile phones. And there was one such Philips factory in the States, and there was a devastating fire in one of the Philips factories. And this caused a supply chain disruption. But Nokia and Ericsson worked closely with Philips, and Philips were convinced they were going to be able to get their supply chain up and running again, produce the chips and supply them downstream to Nokia and Ericsson in a small number of weeks. Ericsson took Philips' word for it. Ericsson believed that Philips would be able to supply the chips again in a small number of weeks, but Nokia didn't rely on Philips' assessment, and they partnered closely with Philips to be able to produce alternative chipsets, so there'll be a very, very small disruption to Nokia manufacturing their handsets. So Ericsson were quite slow to respond, and as you can guess, Philips was not able to get their factory back online again, but they'd already worked closely with Nokia to provide an alternative chipset. Because Ericsson was slow to respond, there was a sudden crisis and shortage in the chipsets, and this proved to be a really pivotal moment in the success of Nokia and the downfall of Ericsson. It created a dramatic drop-off in sales, causing a divergence in the success of the two companies. Nokia went on for a few more years to be very successful, and Nokia's market share declined quite radically. Second story, more recently, the story of Walmart. Walmart, a huge retailer, grocery retailer in America, have fantastic logistics, fantastic distribution, and they found themselves in a very unique position in 2005. 2005, there was a horrific natural disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Katrina, for those who remember, caused great devastation to the southern states, and Walmart were in a unique position to help and to respond very, very rapidly. And the CEO of the time, Lee Scott, knew that many of his colleagues were in a position to provide rapid support and aid to the communities who were stranded and isolated and in great need of help. And so he allowed his colleagues to make use of their well-beaten supply chain to provide help to individuals. And he gave this quote, which I find fantastic, which allowed people to have a great amount of autonomy. They didn't have to go, because communication lines are broken. They were able to have a great deal of autonomy, and because they're closest to the problem, be able to respond to where need was needed the most. So the quote is, a lot of you are going to have to make decisions above your level. Make the best decision that you can with the information that's available to you at the time, and above all, do the right thing. So I'd like us to remember this when it comes to organisational resilience. This is a key component of organisational resilience. So let's think about the last two stories, the one of Sony and Ericsson and the one of Walmart responding to a natural disaster. And let's see what's favourable out of the two stories. So Walmart uses the logistics capability in an unanticipated manner. Nokia didn't accept Philips's first assessment of how quickly they could get their factories back online, or their particular factory back online, and they partnered with Philips to find an alternative. So what's characterized by this is early detection and quick response. So early detection and quick response, let's think about that in the current climate of COVID-19, and think about how organizations have or haven't benefited from early detection and quick response. What are the unfavorable things in the last two stories? So Ericsson were blind to the threats and quite lethargic in their response, and that was a monumental decision which changed its destiny, and it resulted in the loss of market share and the continued rise for Nokia for a while, until around, when was it, 2007, with the rise of the smartphone. So this story of Nokia is another element of organizational resilience. It's not only about supply chain, it's about strategic resilience as well. And specifically around, for those in the software space, around the dangers of large tech debt, and how large tech debt makes organizations less nimble, less agile, and consequently less organizationally resilient. So I've spoken to one person close to the downfall of Nokia and the rise of Apple, is that Nokia was aware that they needed to move into the smartphone market, but their attempts were hampered by large tech debt, and the poor communication lines within the organization. They've become fairly siloed, which is unsustainable, and therefore they weren't able to respond. They've become less resilient. So that's another lesson. So what problems profoundly affect organizations? It's the ability or inability to respond to rapid, unanticipated change. So this is where resilience comes into play. So resilience is the ability to deal with shock events. So the next few sections of the presentation, I'd like to describe what resilience is, bringing in some concepts such as anti-fragility. But again, I'm going to pause there and just open up for any questions. So Kawad, I'm not sure if there's any questions or whether you would like to ask your other question now.
No, there is a comment from Piotr about the cross the chasm. That, in his opinion, is about laggards, not so less optimistic than you are.
Okay.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Please,
yeah.
if you need, sorry, just for the audience, you are free to make any question on the topics that we are talking about. You know, we are a very open community.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Corrado. So now we're going to talk about what is resilience. So that previous slide here is a summary, just a few words: the ability to deal with shock events, and these events which cannot be anticipated. So thinking about resilience, it's recognizing that failure is inevitable, and reconfiguration, reshaping, adapting into an unforeseen state is a consequence of being resilient. And it may include an intentional step towards the unknown. So one thing to emphasize with resilience is an acceptance of continuous exploration and reshaping. Another word to bear in mind and that we should define is robustness. So a robust organization tries to avoid failure. It tries to resist it, or it tries to return back to a previous state. So thinking about COVID-19, let's think about whether our organizations are resilient or robust. A robust organization returned to a state, perhaps a state that they were in at the end of last year or the first few weeks of 2020. And it's an organization which likes to avoid the unknown, who has an emphasis on execution, not exploration. And most organizations, I would say, needs to have a flavor of both, and they need to be able to balance those two areas appropriately to be able to adapt to uncertainty and an increasingly complex world. So one story is from a few months ago where I believe this organization is far too robust and not resilient enough. And that's the story of Thomas Cook. It seems like a long time ago that Thomas Cook went out of business, but it was only a few months ago. And I like this quote from a travel expert who was saying that Thomas Cook wasn't ready for the 21st century. They had a business model which was calcified or too much entrained into one where they needed to depend on high street travel agents and too reliant on the older way in which we may have gone on holiday, which is purchasing a package holiday, flights, accommodation, excursions, all the rest of it. But now the market's moved on. There's a greater tendency that the travel agent market hasn't totally closed, but it's definitely a lot smaller than it was like 20, 30, 40 years ago. So everyone can become their own travel agent now. The business model has totally changed. But Thomas Cook were too dependent on that previous business model to be able to move towards exploration. So this is an example of a robust organization being unable to move into business models which are a lot more popular, a lot more attractive for customers and stakeholders in this day and age. One thing to also be aware of is this notion of anti-fragility. And you could say this is a notion which is beyond resilience. Some say anti-fragility is a subset of resilience. So just be aware that people see anti-fragility in different ways. So some see it as something beyond resilience, or some people see it as a subset of resilience. But let's move on, just acknowledging that. Anti-fragility is a term or a concept popularized by Nassim Taleb. And he describes three different states of an organization. There's an organization which is fragile, one which can easily break under some volatility or some uncertainty, and that's described, or an analogy could be the sword of Damocles. Damocles asked, as the story goes, he asked King Dionysus, what is it like to be a leader? And King Dionysus says, it's like having this sword over me all the time. At the slightest movement could break the fine hairs which are holding up this sword, and it could fall upon me in my reign my powers can just diminish in a blink of an eye. So organizations are like this, are highly fragile. And then there's organizations which are resilient. So this is like the phoenix, who burns to dust but reforms into the same shape again, into the same state again. So think about organizations who are resilient. And then there's anti-fragile organizations. I'm going to give you a few examples of this, of anti-fragile organizations who actually thrive on disorder. They like volatility. They actually move towards volatility because they know they've got to reshape. So why don't we just disrupt ourselves? And there's a fantastic example of that, of an organization which is making great strides in this day and age. We'll come to that a bit later. So here we're talking about fragile organizations who break at the slightest sign of volatility, resilient organizations who are able to respond, but they go back to their previous states, and anti-fragile organizations who not only anticipate and understand disorder, but actually move towards it and actually cause their own disruptions so they can reshape themselves. So that was the description of resilience. So we're now going to move on to how can organizations cope with uncertainty and actually capitalize upon it. Again, I'm just going to pause there before I go into the next section, see if there's any questions or thoughts. Feel free to unmute yourself, or Corrado, perhaps you can unmute anybody who has any thoughts or observations.
No question. But as usual, I have a question always.
Okay, good stuff. Good man.
And the example that you described about, for example, Nokia, it's a description a posteriori. I mean, it's something that happened in the past that now we analyze with a lens of their future. Okay, and so we were able to identify how a company can, let me say, learn in difficult time. How can they evolve? In today, for example, given the actual crisis, do you see someone that is behaving like a resilient company or as an anti-fragile company? What is your perception? What is going to happen in the market?
Yeah, I think it's too early to say. Those organizations who have, sorry, I'm just hearing myself there, Corrado. Do you mind just muting yourself for a moment? Thanks. Yeah, so those organizations who have a wide portfolio of interests, those optionalities which Nokia had developed over many, many decades, allows for emergence to occur and allows those organizations to amplify or move into those areas which, through just natural selection, they see that this is a good initiative, product or service to capitalize upon. Those on the call might know some good examples, so feel free to share any brands or organizations who are actually taking advantage of these times of uncertainty.
Okay, I can share. I put the link in my opinion, what a company that behave like that. It's a company that I know really well. I'm copying the link in the chat. Okay, this company, Ocean Reef, it's an Italian company actually. Okay, and it's a very famous brand for scuba diving face mask. I mean, in scuba diving, there are two kinds of goggles, okay, or better, you have goggles, okay, that you have a small screen just for your eyes, okay, and then you have what they call face mask. And I don't know if you have the opportunity to go to the link. So we are talking about a scuba diving mask that has also noise and muff behind the screen, okay? The advantage of this kind of mask is that you can talk because the mask create a room that you can have a microphone inside the mask, and then you can talk. So this company is a global leader for this kind of masks that are the only masks used by workers under the sea. So if you have to build something under the sea and you have to communicate, the workers don't use usually the standard Google, but they use this kind of masks, okay? This company, however, is also working in a military environment and create anti-gas mask. I don't know the word in English. I mean, to protect people while breathing bad gases and bad air, okay? So they had this idea to convert the production to generate a face mask for medical surgery in this kind of situation. So I'm presenting this example because I'm not sure if this can be seen as a resilient company that, or better, an anti-fragile company, because they changed their skin in these critical circumstances, or simply, into brackets, an innovative company. So what makes the difference between innovation and anti-fragility?
Anti-fragility is an intentional damage of the organization. It's to actually don't wait for the disruption to happen, but cause a disruption to the organization. So I was going to save this for later, but one great example of this is Netflix and their Chaos Monkey.
Chaos Monkey, right.
Yeah. So Chaos Monkey is essentially a script which goes round and at random unplugs various components of the infrastructure. Corrado, I'm really hearing myself echo here, so I'm not sure if you can mute yourself to see if it goes away.
Sorry, I'm muting.
Yeah. Thanks. So that's a lot better. Thank you. So Chaos Monkey is a script which randomly disables certain parts of Netflix infrastructure, and those in operations have got to be able to respond to that fast enough to ensure that customers cannot experience the detrimental impact that has had on the infrastructure. And this could happen at a local level, it could happen at a global level. And I know that there are bigger stages of Chaos Monkey. So there could be like a global outage or a particular data center goes down. So this is intentional damage that Netflix has inflicted upon its own infrastructure. So I think that's a really good example. And these create learning insights and adaptability and ultimately resilience. And this is beyond the resilience that normally happens where organizations wait for damage to occur. And I believe that's a nice example of anti-fragility.
Clear. Thank you.
Yeah. There was, Corrado, you also asked me for an example of an organization who is resilient in the age of COVID. And I think one example of that is Amazon. So Amazon have been able to respond very, very quickly, very, very nimbly. So a few weeks ago, certainly in the States, they limited their range of products, just the essential products. And they were able to respond to price gouging, I think it's called. So this is where merchants on that platform were selling face masks or antiseptic hand gels at extraordinarily high prices. And they were nimble enough and they had the right agility to be able to put in place measures to prevent that from happening. They've been able to scale their logistics. They've been able to hire many, many people to be able to respond to these uncertainties that they could not have anticipated 6 months ago or even 3 months ago. And another example of this is our supermarkets. I think certainly in the UK, our supermarkets have done an extraordinary job to be able to be nimble and show their resilience in their supply chain, and do a fantastic job to recover the service, and create a new normal. And they're going to have to continuously change over the coming weeks, months, and perhaps years. I've just seen there's some other questions as well here. I'm just going to see if I can pick out one. Arun, so yes, Seaman Army is the Chaos Gorilla. So thank you there. So that's another levels of anti-fragility. So Arun is saying that's where they take out a whole data center. Aris is saying, do you think we have over-optimized and gone too far sometimes with Lean? Yes, I see where you're coming from. Yeah. So one of the downfalls of Lean, one of the advantages of Lean is that we don't hold any more inventory than we need to. Inventory, as we know, is one of the biggest costs. And so what happens with Lean operations or Lean supply chains, we try to minimize inventory as much as possible. And we try to reduce cycle time between customer need and be able to, from all up the supply chain, to be able to deliver that product or service very, very rapidly. But the downfall of Lean operations is that there is no inventory in the supply chain to be able to respond to a sudden demand of toilet paper, pasta, or antiseptic wipes or gels. So there's someone else is here. Tesco's is a good example in the current situation. They've added over 100. They've had hundreds of collection points moved well. Yeah, that's a fantastic example. Another example of a resilient organisation, perhaps not demonstrating anti-fragility, but a resilient organisation is Pret. Pret have reopened some of their stores, I think in the London area first of all, just a handful. They've put up perspex screens between cashiers and customers. They've reduced the number of items down from 60 to 11, but only allowing a certain number of customers into their stores at any one time. So they're beginning to test and learn really, really quickly. And I'm going to play in testing and learning later on into this talk. So there's another example of Pret, of another example of an organisation in Pret of a resilient organisation. So please have been able to come up with a few examples. You stumped me there, Corrado, when you asked me, are there examples out there? There's a few other questions. Perhaps I can return to those in a moment. But let's move on. So how should firms cope? So I put together, with experience and the experience of others that I'm close to, an emergent set of principles and practices for creating a resilient organisation. So remember, the definition of resilience in my words, well, in fact, these are words from others, they're not really my words, it's the ability to deal with shock events. And there are three different areas here. One is early detection, another is enabling fast response, and thirdly, intended exposure. We've already mentioned a few things around intended exposure. Firstly, I'd like to talk about early detection. There's a number of different practices and principles here. I've collected 6 here. We don't have time to go through all of them, but feel free to ask in the Q&A at the end. But also feel free to reach out to me after our time together this evening. First of all, early detection can occur through divergent and convergent thinking, where we speak to many people within our organisation, we canvass opinion. And what I have here, what I'm about to play is a very, very short video, about 20 seconds long, which shows a group of people who've broken out into smaller groups, and they begin a very, very small brief, a problem that's been presented to them, and that all these small groups are coming up with ideas of how they can respond to this problem. And this allows early detection to happen. for many, many opinions, many, many ideas to be canvassed. So if I just play this video, hopefully it's not going to be too stuttery over this video share. So you can see here, there are 3 groups of people, and they're all brainstorming ideas to be able to capitalize upon this opportunity. You can see the product owner, that's on the right-hand side. You can see some tech leads, you can see some developers. This is actually in one of the broadsheet newspapers that I work for. So what's happening here is an intentional practice to be able to canvass opinion, to come up with divergent thinking. If I go back to the presentation now. Another technique is being able to study the current business model of your organization. And this is the business model canvas, which was put together by Strategyzer around 10 years ago. And those who aren't familiar with the business model canvas, essentially it's a way of
we are still watching
easily
the video.
Be able to identify the customer segments, the value propositions for the individual customer segments, the channels that this organization uses to be able to meet customer demand or customer need. What are the relationships? What's the brand strength? And then upstream, what are the key partners? What are the key skills? What are the key resources? What are the capital costs which need to be maintained? What are the key activities which need to be in play to be able to deliver and develop the customer proposition?
Dean, can you share your presentation with us, please?
Sorry, yes. I'll share the presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bear with me. Just a minute. Is my presentation back?
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic. So yeah, so this is the business model canvas. And if we're able to map our existing business model on the business model canvas, we'll be able to identify areas where there could be threats. What's the current size and nature of the customer segment? Are particular customers moving on to competition, or are they dwindling for some reason? Are particular channels, existing channels, becoming less relevant? Are there emerging channels? Are there new platforms? Do we need to capitalize more on social media, for example? Are there key resources or key skills which are becoming less and less common? So if you're thinking about technology, perhaps we have a strong competency and a skill base which is becoming less and less prevalent in the market. Are certain revenue streams becoming smaller? Do we need to be able to put more growth in customer acquisition? Maybe move to a different country, move to a new market. So by mapping our business model in the different aspects, this will allow us to create early detection to see if there are new opportunities or new threats emerging. And this needs to be done on a regular basis. So if we think about an example of an incumbent taxi company, say a black cab operator or the yellow taxis in New York, they may, if they did this on a regular basis 10 years ago, they may have seen the emergence of ride-hail app providers such as Uber or Lyft. And they could see a movement, a reduction in their revenue stream, a loss of particular customers, and be able to respond to that very, very quickly because they've detected the threat early and also the opportunity early as well. Another tool that we can use for early detection is Wardley mapping. Wardley mapping is familiar to some of us on the call here. Wardley mapping is an interesting development on on the value chain. So the value chain, just a quick introduction to Wardy Map. The value chain is from top to bottom here. So you have customers at the top, and what are the key components that we have to be able to deliver against that customer need? And there could be some underlying components. So for example, here there could be a website, there could be some kind of recommendation engine, there could be some stream of services. So this will be a company such as Netflix or Now TV. And behind that, there are some web servers, some customer relationship management software, and these components as you get deeper and deeper, become more and more invisible to the customer. So that's essentially the value chain. But also on the horizontal axis, this is where we can identify in an organization, is this brand new, is this in Genesis, or is this all right at the other end where it's highly commoditized, that we can go to market and be able to acquire this quite easily. So example here is compute. We know Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. Many organizations have taken advantage of compute and cloud technologies. But let's suppose our organizations over here, or even over here, we are customizing our own compute capability. We still have on-premise servers. So we can use this for early detection to see where the market's moving. So roll back 10 years ago, if there's one or two companies moving towards the right, we could say that's an opportunity for early detection to see where the market's moving, and then decide whether that's the right or wrong thing for us to move in that direction. So I think Wardy mapping is a fantastic and powerful and simple tool to allow us to increase organizational resilience and create that situation awareness. Okay, so we spoke about early detection. I'm going to pause there again to see if there's any thoughts or questions, any contributions.
No, Dean, there are no contributions here.
Okay, thank you. Piotr, I'm just reading the messages here. The example of Valhalla and the M&M's testing story. Piotr, if it's all right, Corrado, perhaps we can invite Piotr to unmute and just share that Van Halen story. I'm aware of it, and I'd be interested to know how that links to anti-fragility.
Yeah, Piotr, you can unmute. You can talk. You can unmute by yourself. If you want.
If you want. So if it doesn't, I know the M&M story of and Van Halen. Piotr, let me know if I get this wrong. But Van Halen, for those who don't know, was a very popular band a few decades ago, a rock band, and they did an awful lot of touring, and they had roadies that they went to market. They contracted to provide suppliers to be able to allow them to be on the road for so long, and their contracts were very, very long and dense, and they had one line in there which could easily be overread, where their suppliers, their roadies, had to supply bowls of M&Ms in their changing rooms, but they had to take out the brown M&Ms. And this was a test to see whether these companies, these contractors, would actually read in detail the contract. If they did, they would take out the brown M&Ms. If they didn't, they'd leave the brown M&Ms in. So this is a very unique and an inventive way of finding out whether their suppliers were truly understanding the peculiar needs of Van Halen. And I guess it's anti-fragile because they would have gone through some suppliers who didn't take out the brown M&Ms, and perhaps because they didn't do that, they weren't that detail orientated, and they were dropping the ball in other areas. So over time, they actually found some suppliers who were detail orientated and provided a better service to Van Halen as they are touring the world. So yeah, nice example of anti-fragility. Okay, let's move on. So resilience, the ability to deal with shock events. We've spoken about early detection, that now we're going to move on to...
Sorry, Dean.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. There are a couple of questions also before the Piotr one that we left behind before.
Okay.
So one from Brandon, really. What the retailers in the UK ready to go? And then also one from Marielle. Can you see them?
Yes. So Brendan, let's have a look. So were the retailers in the UK ready to go in that they had home shopping offers already built many years before the current crisis? Or from your experience with large retailers, can you say they were systematically resilient? I think they were in a position to capitalize upon their capability for home delivery. I don't think they did that to create resilience. They couldn't anticipate something like COVID-19. I just think they had something available which they could turn to as more traditional grocery shopping was under threat. It's quite interesting what the large retailers have done, because the bottleneck wasn't actually the vans on the road delivering to customers, to customer doorsteps. What I think the bottleneck was the lack of people in their warehouses. So my understanding is that large retailers have been recruiting quickly, similar to Amazon, to be able to bring more people into their distribution centers. So that I guess is building upon an existing capability, being able to capitalize on it and nimbly recognizing where the bottleneck is, and which was the lack of colleagues within the distribution centers. So I guess that's a degree of resilience there. And Corrado, did you say there's another question from someone?
Yeah, the one after from Marielle, how does the product instead of new asset and still do this to be able to quickly adapt?
Okay, so yeah, how does focus on product instead of focus on human assets and skills contribute to this, to be able to quickly adapt? Product. I think we need to focus on all areas, product and human assets and skills. But with respect to product, it's thinking about the downfall of Nokia. We've got to ensure that the right product fits the right purpose, and if we're going to nimbly pivot, in Nokia's case, to smartphones, is ensure that there's an acceptable minimum amount of tech debt. The downfall of Nokia was a big contributor, was the huge amount of tech debt. So I'm saying that in respect to a focus on product.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I was asking that because I hear that some of the companies like Volkswagen, who's been focusing so much on combustion engine, cannot transform their staff fast enough to work on electrical vehicles. So if you focus too much on the product and not on the growth of the staff and the skill set of the staff, how does that affect the resilience of the company? That was my question.
Yeah, hugely. And organizations can take different strategies to do that. Individuals, organizations are like individuals in that we like to conserve energy and we like to reduce uncertainty. And because of that, we have a tendency to build ourselves on yesterday's success, to be able to become efficient and be able to repeat those successes today and hopefully tomorrow. But as the world becomes more and more rapid and more uncertain and more interconnected, that lack of exploration and innovation at an individual as well as an organizational level becomes extremely risky. So it's not only personal development, it's also an individual need, and not necessarily a total responsibility of the organization, but an individual need to be able to challenge one's expectations, beliefs, assumptions, and convictions. I think the Agile community does a fantastic job of doing that. One phrase is strong beliefs loosely held. And thinking about some of the successes of Amazon are built upon notions of disagree and commit. And that ties into the Agile ways of working, is that I'm going to disagree, but I'm going to commit to this, and using sprints or some kind of increment, we take something to market, and then with data, with custom insight, we know whether I'm right or wrong. So I'm not sure if my response helps there, but I believe the answer's there in terms of human assets and skills. And there's going to be some later slides which talks about how organizations can acknowledge that individuals are, they do find it difficult to be able to get out of that gravity well, to be able to look at new opportunities and unlearn some of the things that they've become entrained to repeat over and over again. So, enabling fast response. So again, we have 6 different areas that we can dive into. There's not enough time for me to dive into all of them. Just looking at the clock, we're about 1 hour, 10 minutes into the presentation. So roughly speaking, we're more or less on track. But unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of these, but feel free to reach out to me after this call if you want to dive into some of the areas. So the first one I'd like to speak about is enabling fast response by looking at some of the things that was made popular in the book Turn the Ship Around, David Marquette. And he has this idea of pushing authority to information. So if we think about a traditional organization, a hierarchical one, is that we have teams and individuals at the bottom, and then we have an all-knowing, all-seeing leader at the apex of the organization. And traditionally, there was a belief that individual could answer all the questions with all of his or her lieutenants below them and all the different stratas and tiers of the organization. And what would happen traditionally, to some degrees of success, is that information to be gathered at the bottom, where the teams and individuals are. That information to be passed up to the higher stratospheres of the organization for this all-known, all-seeing leader to make some decision, perhaps with the other people that are up their level. That decision will then get passed back down for the teams and individuals to implement. That doesn't sound like a very nimble organization. Let's suppose that for this organization, it takes, say, 6 weeks for a decision to occur. In a fast-moving market where organizations need to outlearn and outperform the competition, 6 weeks is not going to cut it. So rather than push information up to authority, we've got to look for opportunities to push authority down to where the information exists. Let's say authority has moved down to this area here in the organization for some decisions. This would reduce that feedback cycle and for decisions to happen more locally. And let's suppose rather than 6 weeks, it happens in 2 weeks. So here we can see we're enabling fast response. And if we go deeper into David Marquette's thinking, there's a body of work which allows trust to develop with the teams and individuals at the bottom of the organization. And he talks about decision-making power, the amount of control individuals have over decisions being proportional to the clarity that they have the mission and the technical competency they have of delivering or executing a decision. So if individuals have a high clarity of the mission goal, could be broken down into small pieces if you think about a 2-week sprint goal. If they demonstrate, if they can articulate what that mission is, and if they have technical competencies, we can incrementally release more and more control over their decisions. And what's important here, this switches the role of leaders and managers from telling individuals and teams what to do to one which is coaching and creating a nurturing environment where individuals and teams can understand the clarity and develop the competency to make more local rapid decisions, which ultimately delivers a faster response. Another enabler for fast response is the innovation portfolio. And this is what Nokia did very well in its history. This is taken from the book Lean Enterprise, written by Barry O'Ryan and a few others as well. So what we have here is various different domains where in the sustained domain, maybe some products and services, a small number of them that a company is offering its customers and stakeholders. And we know the world is becoming more complex and chaotic, and there's more uncertainty. So the relevance of a lot of these products and services are becoming, for some of them, becoming less and less relevant. So we need to be quite aware of those which need to transition into a retire phase, so we can sunset these products and services. But we may ask ourselves, if the numbers of products and services are dwindling in the sustained space, what's going to take their place? So what we have here on the left-hand side are things that the organizations are exploring, the organization is exploring. So these are where rapid experiments are happening, where a great pace of innovation is occurring, where we're looking for a problem solution fit. We know our customers and stakeholders have some want, need, or desire. So we're rapidly trying to put something together with MVP or lean startup approaches to see whether we are finding a problem solution fit. There could be dozens and dozens of initiatives in this space here, but only a small proportion of those are going to graduate to the exploit stage. It may be only 1 in 10. So those who do succeed into the exploit stage, here we are looking for scalability. We're looking to operationalize something. We're looking to see how big is the market? How far can we take this? So here we're looking for a product market fit. And because there's great uncertainty, again, only a small number of those are going to be able to graduate to sustain. So again, perhaps 1 in 10. So if it's 1 in 10 to explore to exploit, and it's 1 in 10 from exploit to sustain, that ratio is 1 in 100. So this suggests for fast response to occur, to capitalize on opportunities and to increase organizational resilience, we've got to have organizations who are not just looking at sustain, existing value. They've got to be able to switch to more experimentation and innovation for their own existence. So this also speaks to a flow of initiatives from left to right. And this is where that visibility and that portfolio balancing can occur. And this is something which is I've helped organizations put together before. And this is something that I think we can all help our organizations to put together if we have the ear of the right people, of the right leaders. The next few slides, I'm just going to pause there. The next few slides are going to build on that. So I'm just going to pause there to see if there's any observations or questions. Okay, it doesn't sound like it, so I'm going to move on.
Yeah, Dean, we didn't have any comments or questions. We have Marielle that thank you. Say thank you.
Cool. Okay, let's move on. Thanks. So I believe this actually links to Marielle's question here around individuals, and if I just scroll up to the questions here, human assets, skills. I think this plays into it. So what I've put together here are some slides to visualize this notion of the ambidextrous organization. So to be ambidextrous is having capability which where we're using the left hand and the right hand of the organization at the same time. So the entrepreneurial system, this is where, if we just go back a slide, this is the left-hand side of the innovation portfolio. This is where we're doing lots and lots of rapid experiments, and we're learning through failure. We're learning by doing. We're taking stuff to the market rapidly to know what's right or wrong. So this is characterized by a great deal of complexity, uncertainty, rapid change. Here, the governance process, the way we lead, the way we manage, the way we monitor, is emphasized by innovation. We're looking to explore, we're looking to learn and grow, we're looking to adapt and kill rapidly. We're looking for rapid innovation. This is one side of the ambidextrous organization. The other side is the more operational side of the organization. So this is where we have our current successes, and we're looking for continuous improvement. We're looking for maintenance, we're looking for revenue. We are not necessarily looking for revenue on the entrepreneurial side of the business. The entrepreneurial side of the business, our key measures of success are learning outcomes. Are the right behavior changes occurring with our customers and stakeholders? We're looking for leading indicators. Here we're looking for impact on the right-hand side. We're looking to maintain, we're looking to improve. This is characterized by things which are fairly familiar, things which are routine, things which are predictable, things which are known. So going back to Mariela's question here around human assets and human capabilities, there are people who are naturally accustomed and feel familiar and feel comfortable on one side or the other. There are a few operators who are able to navigate both. These are extraordinary people, and those are people to really hold on to. But there are some people who excel and feel very comfortable with the operational side. There are people who feel very comfortable with the entrepreneurial side. They are comfortable in ambiguity. So when we design teams and when we want to increase entrepreneurialism and we want to increase organizational resilience, we need to think about developing the ambidextrous side of the organization, or rather both sides of the organization. This also ties into some of the measures, some of the metrics, which are different for both sides. The entrepreneurial systems, the innovations we're creating tend to be hard to measure, but there are some things, I've already mentioned it, leading indicators. Are our customers or stakeholders respond in a way which is valid and correct? It requires end-to-end collaboration. Incentives are intrinsic, they tend to be. So if we think about Daniel Pink, autonomy, mastery, purpose. For the operational side, these tend to be easier to measure. Cash in the till, operational excellence, deviation from the norm. These are all measures to see whether the operational side is succeeding or not. They tend to be more easily divided into silos, where work is handed down from one silo to the next, or one specialism to the next. That's not a bad thing if it's associated more with the operational side of organizations. And you could argue, I'd like to explore this to people tend to be perhaps more incentivized by extrinsic motivation. The challenges for incumbent organizations, they become pattern and trained, they become calcified around the operational side of the business. And any innovation which occurs, any innovation unit, any kind of rapid entrepreneurial unit becomes calcified, or they become closed down or stifled by the entrepreneurial side of the business. I have another talk and experiences for me to go into that. Perhaps I can be invited back to look into how we can overcome this difficulty. But this is the reality for many organizations. Okay, another element of being able to respond fast, and that is one of weak links. And I'd like to describe this. Weak links, it creates diversity and great resourcefulness in a time of crisis. Some research was done after an area of the world was met by catastrophic natural disaster. There was an area where great flooding occurred, and researchers found that the towns and communities who were able to rebuild themselves most rapidly and most successfully were those communities who had weak links, who had access to different specialisms, to people who could construct and rebuild their homes, teachers or experts who could be brought into the community to be able to rebuild certain educational institutions, lawyers or solicitors who are able to rebuild contracts or be able to deal with any legal work which allowed that community to get back on its feet. So this is the power of weak links and being able to access people which is beyond the 150 people, that Dunbar number of the maximum number of people that we can have close relationships with. Those in the weak links community can be a lot bigger than the 150 people that any human can typically have close relationships with. So this creates organisational resilience, having access to a high degree, a high diversity of people across many different fields of work. Another area is, this is something that I blogged about quite recently, I put on LinkedIn about a week ago as well, around a week ago, is looking, I won't go into too much detail here, these slides will be available, but being able to restabilise the situation, being able to reach out to suppliers, build the relationships you have with your customers, be able to put things in place where customers can develop confidence. So hoteliers, for example, could put measures in place where they demonstrate that they have cleaned the rooms, they disinfected the bedding, they've actually plastic wrapped the bedding, and only the guests can actually open up that plastic wrapping to prove for the customer to know that the bedding has been cleaned. That's an example of how we can rebuild trust and confidence with customers. Another area here is resilience. This is what we're talking about here. This is placing lots of small bets and see which ones customers are responding to. So this is playing on the left-hand side of the ambidextrous organisation. And the other area here is rebuilding the organisation or restructuring the organisation based on the experiences of how we've been able to cope the last few weeks. What benefits do we want to retain from working from home? What benefits could we have from using new technologies, new tools, new ways of working? We've been able to survive with a minimum operation. These are fantastic lessons and experiences that we can have for the future and how we can restructure ourselves. So this is a framework that I've developed called the 4R cycle. And it's a cycle because we don't know how much further uncertainty there's going to be, whether COVID-19 is going to come back and cause further disruption. So this isn't a linear path. There's no close to this. We need to close this feedback loop as much as possible and return to restabilize, create stronger relationships, be resilient, and restructure ourselves continuously. Okay, I'm going to skip over this for the interest of time. I can come back to this perhaps during the Q&A or after this call. So I'm going to pause there before moving on to intended exposure. Any questions on enabling fast response?
No, Dean. Actually, there are no new questions. No new questions.
Okay, thank you. So, intended exposure. First of all, I'd like to describe what hormesis is. There's a question which isn't coming through that clearly. Do you want to repeat the question, please? Or leave it in the chat?
I think it was the echo, Dean, that you're receiving.
Oh, it's just the echo. Right, okay, thanks for that. I'll move on.
Yeah, sorry for the echo, but there is something in my computer, so I have to put the earphones, remove the earphones, put the plug-in, and so on. So it's not easy. Yeah, well, please go ahead, Dean.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so I'll move on. So hormesis is a biological phenomenon, a beneficial effect resulting from exposure to a low dosage of an agent that otherwise would be toxic or lethal in a high enough dose. So an example of this is sunlight. So in a small dose, sunlight is healthy, gives us a healthy skin complexion, allows our body to synthesize vitamin D. Another example of hormesis from a biological point of view is lots of research is revealing the benefits of intermittent fasting. So this is where there could be a low-calorie diet for a period of time that reduces inflammation, it reduces any onset pre-diabetic symptoms. Our immune system is a great example of hormesis. And this links to a lot of the autoimmune diseases which are becoming more and more prevalent. So the immune system is always looking out for a fight. It's looking for stressors. It's looking for threats that it can respond to. If there are no threats, then the immune system turns against the body itself, creating autoimmune diseases. As an aside, our increasingly sterile homes is a potential consequence of the autoimmune diseases which are becoming very prevalent in developed countries. Another example of hormesis, extending this a little bit, is the rise in interest in post-traumatic growth. Is that as people stress chaos more than we did do before that trauma had actually occurred. So that's hormesis, and I'd like to have that in our mind as we talk about go through the next section. So chaos monkey, I've already mentioned this as an example, a fantastic example of anti-fragility of intended exposure. An example from one of the big retailers that I had of anti-fragility intended damage. This is an example of a small convenience store. This is a product from an in-store bakery. One of the local store managers had recognized that some of the SKUs, some of the lines weren't selling that well. He turned to the head office to see if they could crunch the numbers to be able to project what SKUs should be made available and which SKUs should be made unavailable based on historical data. That can take a long time. That can take days to be able to crunch that data. So I think I lost my connection there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Yeah, I did.
I'm back.
Yes. Yeah, good.
Are you still seeing the slide deck?
No, we cannot see the computer. You have to reshare your screen.
Okay, I'll do that now. So I'll just replay what I've said so far. So this is one of the teams was working with a manager of a small convenience store, and we intentionally closed down the in-store bakery to learn through the complaints from customers to find out what they genuinely wanted. We didn't survey them. We didn't crunch the numbers on sales. We very rapidly learned what customers wanted, and that was a lot more rapid to put the right SKUs on the shelves and for the in-store bakery to produce. Another example of intentional exposure for this supermarket chain, we decided to improve the customer service experience at the front of the store by working with a small number of store managers to close down the customer service desk and coach and support customer service colleagues who normally be trapped behind the desk to actually greet customers and go to customers who look like they needed help. Maybe they've got a complaint, maybe they're looking for a particular product on the shelf. And to be frank, this didn't work all the time. The experience wasn't always good, but we learned rapidly what was the right thing and wrong thing to do by closing down these customer service desks and changing the model in a really, really rapid way. And for some of the stores, it was so successful closing down the customer service desk that we freed up the space at the front of the store. This is prime retail space, and we put in other concessions. So you can see Lindor put in an offer in here where the customer service desk used to be. So not only did we increase customer satisfaction, not only did we allow colleagues to be more proactive, we actually increased incremental sales through this intentional exposure and rapid learning and respond quickly. So we've spoken about intended exposure, we spoke about early detection and how that can lead to fast response. Fast response to allow us to stabilize the operations and understand what the situation is. So you may ask, we've learned great insights, we've understood more about the customer and the stakeholders, we've stabilized the organization. There are going to be new opportunities that we can make use of, new products and services. And we know there are established practices to allow us to capitalize on this new knowledge. And wouldn't you know it, the existing practices are Scrum, Lean, and Lean Startup, which we know and love. We practice these, we coach these, we support our leaders and teams to adopt these all the time. So what I'm doing here, I'm linking our existing practices, which we can help our organizations become more organizational resilient. So what I've done here, I've gone through the agenda, and we've spoken about the current maturity of Lean Agile. We've spoken about how, if we are to be change agents, what additional things can we support our colleagues and clients on. We've spoken about we shared some of the stories of how organizations have succeeded and failed when shock events happen. We described what resilience is. We've spoken about how organizations can increase organizational resilience and where I believe our expertise can help organizations increase organizational resilience. So my closing remark is, in an environment of change anxiety and inertia, radical change, I believe we need to seize the opportunity of a crisis. And for many of us, for many of our organizations, we are in this crisis already. So I'm going to open up to questions for the people. and
Dean, we are losing you.
you're losing me.
Okay. Yeah, now you're back. Now you're back.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. As in the slides. Okay. In the meantime, I've added the link to collect your feedback. Now I think we can open the connection for the final QA session. If you have questions, if you have comments, I'm going to unmute all of you. Feel free to join the conversation.
I think, Corrado, if you unmute everyone, you're going to get people who are probably having a bit of background noise. So perhaps just mute everyone and just unmute people individually.
Yep, I've done. Yes, you're right.
Great, fantastic.
Okay.
I've got a
So if someone has some question, okay, please go ahead, Richard, go ahead.
hi, really brilliant session, Dean. Thank you very much. Lots of, I mean, it's something I've been thinking a lot about, but you've brought in a really rich set of other sources to sort of add to the mix. And I've just got two comments. I mean, one is that, I mean, I liked your idea of the ambidextrous organization, but is there not a danger in a lot of organizations about an overemphasis on lean? I mean, if you take the National Health Service, I think, as an example, I mean, this is a political point, but, you know, it's been cut back and cut back, or it was cut back and cut back over the last 10 years. And in doing that, it ceased to focus on these dangers. I mean, the coronavirus is top of the country's risk register. It's a known. It was something that was definitely going to happen at some point, and yet it's clearly apparent that we were completely unprepared for it. In that I mean, for example, the stock of PPE, the value of that over the last 10 years dropped by about 50%. And the reason, in my view, was that you know, the complete focus on business as usual and failure to look, I forget the terms you use, but if essentially failure to look at what was coming down the line and practice for it and to experiment and to trial and all the things that you've been talking about has led, I think, to the situation this country finds itself in at the moment. And you know, I think, I mean, I've certainly seen some posts around this. I'll see if I can dig them out afterwards, sort of saying that, you know, prime cause, I think, of a lot of the problems that, I mean, the NHS and I think other organisations have experienced is this failure to be doing, you know, taking this dual approach that you've described. That was just one sort of comment, really. But I've got an interesting example of your, and I've not heard this expression before, hormesis.
Hormesis, yes.
One of the clients I work with not-for-profits, and one of my clients is a charity that supports people that have had cancer. And I'll see if I can find it after this and put the link on. But I was just watching last night a post from the medical director there saying that although two basically people, their clientele, their service users, saying, although in some respects you may be more vulnerable as somebody that's had cancer, for many people that actually is not the case, and in some respects you're more resilient because you've been through you know, having cancer is always, I think, a tough experience, but by going through that process it's actually made you more resilient and better able to cope with some of the things compared to those of us that haven't had it. And I thought, you know, the parallel with what you were saying there was really interesting, that even, I mean, and to some extent that's why the ambidextrous approach and the you know, the chaos monkey approach is painful. You know, if you are exposing yourselves to those sort of painful experiences of stuff not working, it's painful to the organization, it costs money, and you have to be aware of the fact that in doing that, you're building a more resilient organization. And I was again listening to somebody else on the radio, and they were talking about the availability bias. The countries that have done better in responding to COVID have been those that experienced SARS, and countries like ours that had no recent experience of a pandemic have responded much less well. So, I mean, it's not really a question, but I think it's just evidence to back up, I think, what you've been saying, and I think what you've put together here is really, really useful.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah. What you said resonates with me, and just touching on a couple of your points. Yes, I think the NHS. Sorry, Ryan, just pop this stuff on mute again because we're hearing a bit of rustling. The NHS, yes, and Lean, yes, and I think this. I think it was you or somebody else who asked the question in the chat around our supply chains too lean. Yes, they are, and globalization has also added vulnerability. So think about, we rely on a small number of Asian countries, one in particular, to source particular components and capabilities. If you think about ventilators, if we think about the chemicals that need to be sourced to put together the tests, the antigen and antibody tests for COVID-19, we have to go to market, and it's a competing market. All countries are competing for scarce resources, but if we had by increasing resilience, we would have internalized the capability to be able to respond to this. And as you say, we could have anticipated there would have been something like COVID-19 eventually. Another thought that I have in my mind is another example of how an organization, this ties back to a previous thought where we're looking for examples of companies who have capitalized in an advantage way for all parties. If we think about BrewDog, so BrewDog, those who are familiar with BrewDog, they brew beer. I think they're Scottish. They changed their supply chain. They innovated and improvised very quickly to make hand sanitizers and put those to market. That was probably about 6 weeks ago now. And there's lots of other organizations who have been nimble and repurposed their supply chain to be able to help communities. So thank you, Richard. I'm not sure if there's anybody else have any other questions. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Well, I'm checking the chat, but okay, no more.
Just maybe a couple of other observations,
Okay.
if I may.
Please, share.
Please.
Hi.
Yeah, sure.
So, yeah, globalization versus localization is, you mentioned globalization, and I think, you know, there may be a bit of a change in focus in the world, as we see. You know, I've heard some discussions about moving to a more localized model, particularly in terms of resources. I mean, the example that you give with BrewDog, they were able to do what they could do because they had the resources available, whereas a lot of the UK has been service focused over resource focused. So we may see an adjustment of some way. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see the change that happens in both business, society, and the economy as well. Just also to pick up on Richard's point, I actually used to work in Department of Health in 2008, and we had at the time something called pandemic preparedness. And at the time, there was quite a bit of work that was you know, underway there, and it was recognized at the time that a pandemic of some sort. At the time, it was flu rather than the coronavirus, but there's a lot of similarities, of course. Okay, so it's different ways of treating it, but there is lots of similarities, particularly in terms of requirements for PPE and requirements for extra staff, the ability to mobilize a workforce quickly, that type of thing.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. There's some interesting experience that you've got. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else like to unmute themselves?
Well, Dean, I just have a question. I've been homeschooling my son for the past weeks, and I was just interested, could you share something of what you think this is going to mean for the education system? How do you feel that this resilience is going to maybe show up there?
Hard to predict, but it's incredible natural experiment which has occurred. I think that people are going to question why education is structured the way it is and the expectations that there are around how education is delivered. I'm thinking out loud here. I'm thinking of things like Khan's Academy. Khan's Academy has pioneered this notion of classroom flipping, where students and pupils learn a theory at home in their own time, but then they come together maybe online or in the classroom, and they discuss what they've learned with the guidance and support and the leadership of their teacher. So that classroom flipping, I think, may mean that kids and students don't need to spend 9 to 5. I'm not sure what the parents think about this. Maybe they think it's a huge inconvenience. But perhaps there could be opportunities where children could be at home more, learn the theory, and then come to the class, then go to a place of learning, the physical place of learning, where they can share their thinking. And I think it may be a more progressive form of education, which has proven very popular with the movements such as Khan's Academy.
Well, about this topic, I can share what's happening in Italy. That is could be really interesting because there is after the experience with the community, there is a request to improve the performance of the bandwidth connection for the schools.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's me, Corrado, but you're breaking up quite a lot. I'm not sure if it's me, but you're breaking up an awful lot. Perhaps someone can comment to say whether it's Corrado or whether it's me.
It's Corrado's side.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry, I stopped it. That's not for me.
Okay, I'm not sure if it's your broadband or your headset. We've got a little less than 10 minutes to go. Any other thoughts, observations that people want to share?
I just want to thank you for answering that question, because it got me thinking a lot, because the schooling system has been so rigid. I mean, we're not even allowed to take our kid out of school for an hour. And now all of a sudden it's flipped so much from, having them not in school at all. So I'm very curious to see over the whole width of it in all the countries, how this education system is going to apply some of the things that they have so quickly had to adopt and learn from on all the age groups. It's really been from the small children, primary school to high school. So it's just something I'm very interested in to see how they're going to learn and how that's going to create the future.
Yeah, you've raised a really intriguing topic. And something else I'd like to share as well, and this also applies to other institutions and organisations as well, is that those who advocated work from home or education at home have now been presented a fantastic opportunity to advocate and prove the benefits of remote work and of remote education. And it's their time in the sun. I would also caution that we need to be wary of the unintended consequence of this movement, of this forced movement. There are intangible benefits of being co-located in an office or in a school classroom. Being on a video call, for example, the field of view is narrowed. There's a time lag. Corrado's got a dodgy connection on his end or his headphones or whatever it might be. There's all kinds of things which doesn't occur in a co-located area. We have things which are posture, body language, the emergence of rituals, the importance of place. It could be teams convening in a local coffee shop or returning to a familiar pub table. There are physical, human, environmental triggers which has deep meaning which enable the timeless ability for humans to collaborate. And I think we will lose something if we allow the pendulum to swing too far and exclusively allow people to work from home or have home education. We need to find a new balance, a new stabilization point.
I agree. As you say, it would be too extreme if the change is that everybody has to work from home. And we're actually seeing the effects of what an extreme situation is like right now. In fact, we're probably all seeing the negatives as well as the positives of working from home. So there's lots of lessons to be learned from this. Similarly, I think with the models of change and adaptability, you have to be probably careful of like any kind of whiplash effect or over compensating in one way as a business. That if the market does change into a different direction, you need to be agile enough to move back again if need be. And we may find that when this lockdown is over and people got to return back to work, then the railway services might collapse again, and there might be so it might be a double whammy for the railway services. You might find that first of all they got a lack of customers, and then secondly there'll be too many customers.
Yes. Yeah.
Andrew, if you finished, I think for me an important factor here is if you go back to Kinefin and the Dave Snowden's model, he talks about a collapse into chaos, and that's almost definitely what's happened. But he then also talks about when you're in the chaotic space, that the mode of working is act, sense, respond. And I think where we should be moving to is the sense respond bit. And this is what the bit I've been thinking about, in that we've had a lot of action. People, if you look, one good example of that is the work that's being done around trying to develop viruses. We've got multiple initiatives happening in parallel, sort of a classic example of multiple experiments going on at the same time. And I think it's now a question of sensing what's working and what's not working, and then adjusting our approach in the light of that, in order to sort of move out of that chaos space into the complex space. And that's the bit that I've been thinking about, in that I think organizations need to sort of things get slightly easier, is we need to be looking at what has worked and what is worth keeping, and what isn't working, or is we've seen, for example, with the testing in the UK. They've achieved their goal of this arbitrary goal of being able to do these tests. So from what I can gather, it's now taking 5 days for people to get the results. where, you know, so if you're a member of a hospital staff and you think you've contracted the disease, previously you were getting the results overnight, so you could decide whether to self-isolate or not. So we're seeing, you know, we're moving into that complex space where you're getting unintended side effects, and you need to be really have all your probes working in terms of you know, picking up on what is working and what's not working, and then adjusting your approach in the light of that.
Thanks, Richard. A couple of minutes to go. I'm not sure if there's a final observational question from anybody before we move over to Corrado and closing. Doesn't sound like it. Corrado, would you like to close?
Yes. Okay, what can I say? Thank you, Dean, for sharing this presentation. I really like it. I think it's very helpful for all of us to have such a collection of observation about what resilience, what robustness, and what anti-fragility means. Also, from a very practical perspective, all the description about the practices and tooling that we can use to enhance our resilience, it's really helpful. And I think it's perfect in this stage of the COVID-19 disruption, where we, let me say, are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a good collection of insights for the close future. So thanks again, Dean, for sharing this with us. And thanks to all of you that joined the session. I'm still inviting you to add your feedback and to share your observation on the event. And I think it's enough. We spend, but I don't think spending is the right word, because these 2 hours really go away really quickly. So it's your Dean, it's your way of presenting these tough topics in an easy way. So thank you again. Thank you, everybody, that resist until the end. And remember, next week we are going to have another event. So it's maybe agility initiative, and see our next event. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Sorry for I have to water that.